We're nearly there, honestly. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 34 of F1 in Review, the episode in the hour where we discuss the latest moves in the driver market and in the Constructors' Championship, this one yet to be decided in terms of its winner. I'm Tom Clabon and I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review accounts, where the episodes are now posted automatically once they've gone out on our podcast provider or the one you listen to this podcast on. So we launch straight into the latest moves in the driver market. And before actually Japan kicked off, it was confirmed that Pierre Gasley would be joining Alpine and replacing Fernando Alonso. He's of course going off to Aston Martin. Now, the days before this announcement, it looked like it was a question of more when and not if the 26-year-old would leave Alfa Tauri and join his compatriot in the French constructor. A fun fact for you all, and believe me, this is rather fun. Gasly and Ocon are the first entirely French driver lineup in F1 since 1994. Spoiler alert, before I was born. So yes, Gasly signed a 2-year contract with the team. This can be extended until 2025. So we're told it now means, yes, he's finally left the Red Bull Academy. He's free for good or for ill. First of all then, fellas, what's our thoughts on this news regarding Pierre Gasley going to Alpine?
Yeah, very French, isn't it? That's, yeah. It's either going to be disastrous or like a match made in heaven, I guess, because... well, you know, stereotypically speaking, the French are quite strong characters, and motorsport, again, brings out quite strong characters and passion. And the French, I think, are quite passionate people. And to you French listeners out there, I mean that in a very good way. You've got to remember, coming from the British perspective, where we are all emotionally inept, we look at you with mild envy at your ability to express your innermost desires and passions, where we sort of give each other, you know, knowing looks, and move on. We need closure. And so we're going to have two very French people, and Pierre Gasley, I mean his name's Pierre, and yeah, two very French people in a very French team. It's a shame that Cyril Abiteboul, the old Renault Formula One team principal, is not going to be there either, because to have Gasly, Ocon and Abiteboul in a team, I think then there would be a passion overload. Too much, you know, too much Frenchness would occur there. But, I mean, to be honest, Esteban Ocon isn't necessarily renowned for his ability to get on with his teammates. And he and Sergio Perez, and I'd like to point out that Sergio Perez is Spanish and not French, so there's slightly less passion involved, I think, tried to kill each other on the track a couple of times by the end of it. And I could see, potentially, Pierre Gasley and Esteban Ocon, let's say, coming to blows over problems in the team. But, saying that, the other way I think it's going to go, and there's not going to be an in the middle here, it's going to be one or the other, is their French passion will combine into like a fondue of goodness that will propel the Alpine team up the grid and into, well, I hope, like 2006, 2007 Renault era of goodness, because that level of passion, commitment, and knowing the sport and the team as well, having that roots in your French roots, means that they bring a certain je ne sais quoi to the team. So maybe that should be the new Alpine slogan. Alpine, bringing the je ne sais quoi back to Formula One. They can have that one on me. And so I think it's really good though for Pierre Gasley, because I think we alluded to this in the last episode that Pierre Gasley was not going to go anywhere at Alfa Tauri. The projection for him at Alfa Tauri was stay in Alfa Tauri, leave the sport. This has allowed him to move out of the clutches just a little bit of Dr. Helmut Marko. And given that Red Bull and Dr. Helmut Marko in particular didn't particularly like Pierre Gasley because they kind of showed him up. They went, oh, you're rubbish when you were in Red Bull. And then he went off back to Alfa Tauri and proceeded to be brilliant again. I think him leaving the watchful eye of Dr. Helmut Marko will certainly be really good for him, and also allow him the opportunity to spread his wings a little bit more, and be in what we would say is one of the mid to top teams of Formula One. I expect Alpine this year to end up beating McLaren, which makes them a pretty good pick actually. And he gets a little Alpine car out of it as well, probably, I assume, as opposed to driving Alfa Tauri's shirts and trousers for the next year. So that's really my initial thoughts. Really good, actually, for Pierre Gasley.
Free Gasley is finally over. We no longer need to say those two words. He is free from the chains of Alfa Tauri. But on a serious note, I think this is a very good move for both parties. I think that as much as Alpine have had to advance this action based on the less good moves of annoying their star driver and losing their top young talent, which without that they wouldn't be in this situation. But I think of the options left on the grid, they've chosen the best one for sure. Not that also there was a paucity in options. Not that they were choosing between lesser drivers. They've picked someone who, in the words of Otmar Safnauer, Alpine team principal, Pierre Gasley is still only like 26, 27, which seems hard to believe. It feels like he's been around for ages now. But he has, in Otmar Safnauer's words, the right combination of youth and experience, which is fair because he's been around for a few years. Next year will be his 6th full year in Formula One. He is a race winner. He's also got 2 other podiums in addition to that, in a car which has realistically never been higher than the 6th or 7th fastest on the grid. He's had a bit of an off year compared to his previous high standards this year, after what was a blinding 2021 season and a blinding 2020 season. But this is a driver who is very, very determined, very, very fast, still has a point to prove. I think he'll always have a point to prove, based on what happened at Red Bull and everything there. I also think that it's going to be fascinating to see how he gets on with Esteban Ocon, because if you read the rumours, apparently these two don't get on very well. They were obviously French, both I think born in the same year, so quite possibly in the same karting categories, the same age categories. Having done my research, they are in fact born just 7 months apart, 1996. So they'd have come across each other a lot. And there was a possible rumour of animosity between the two as they both got older. Whether this remains to be seen, we will have to see as time goes forward. But I think that in terms of the potential to produce results, for Alpine, what they hope will be a quicker car next year, and one that they will aim to pull clear of the F1 midfield. I think that it's a very, very solid lineup for them. It has great potential. At the end of the day, you've got 2 race winners in there, which can't be said for all midfield drivers in F1 at the moment. You got 2 drivers who are very determined, who have been classed as future world champions in the past, and also they're 2 drivers who, in the best possible way, their potential and their talent, almost not that anyone deserves a top seat, but they are 2 drivers who deserve to be at the top end of the midfield rather than the bottom. They don't deserve to be stuck down to Haas or an Aston Martin or something like that, a team who'd struggled most of the season. They deserve to be at an Alpine where they are regularly hoovering up points and they are there ready to take advantage of the odd podium or victory opportunity. at the moment, that being until Alpine manages to produce a race-winning car, if they do in the next few years. So yeah, I think it's a good signing. And for Gasley, he's his potential. It's no doubt it's a tricky one with the Red Bull Driver Academy, because there's no doubt that they have a very tough policy and it's quite brutal. And for some drivers, it's ruined their careers. I think of someone like, back in the day, someone like Jean-Eric Vergne or Sébastien Buemi, both very talented drivers who have gone on to achieve great things in other motorsport series, but in Formula 1 didn't quite make the cut and paid the price. But at the same time, the Driver Academy has produced people like Verstappen and Vettel, so it's justified the way they do things. But Gasley was someone who didn't flourish when he was given the chance to be at Red Bull. It's been better for him to be at Alfa Tauri, and you got the impression that he was kind of stuck at Alfa Tauri forever and ever, should he not have left the Red Bull stable. So I think for him it's a good move to be free from that. And of course, that tough Red Bull upbringing that Helmut Marko and Dietrich Mateschitz and Christian Horner and Franz Tost and everyone, what they offer there is tough, but it has made many drivers, and it's also given drivers who have not flourished as much valuable lessons in how to succeed and how to apply themselves. So I think that he's now at a stage, Gasley, where he can take all that he's learnt in that setting, be free from it, but also be able to translate that into success at another team. So I think overall, a very good move for Alpine, considering what they had left on the table, and a good move for Gasley based on where his career was heading and what that path for him was looking like. So I think it's a good move overall for both parties.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's very nice to see Alpine sorting themselves out before the new season, because if we go back to last episode, I think we were all voicing concerns about what was left on the table, what they could have had, and really the fact that they were having to go to other teams cap and handle to former drivers if they wanted to go to Daniel Ricciardo, but alas, they chose not that option. But Pierre Gasley is undisputably a very good driver this season, where Alfa Tauri have been struggling, as we'll get on to. He's scored points 6 times out of 18 races. P13 in the Drivers' Championship, 6 points off Daniel Ricciardo, is probably where we expect him to be, if not slightly higher than you'd expect really when you look at the car he's in and the cars that are better than him doing worse, or the drivers who are driving them, should I say. But to echo your points, not too much more to add really. I suppose if I were to be playing devil's advocate, a bit negative, it's a bit less exciting than what they could have had. Oscar Piastri and Esteban Ocon versus Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasley. That seems a bit of a downgrade in my view, particularly when you consider the friction that we know exists between these two drivers going back to their karting days. So that's an issue that myself now have to deal with. He's done that before in many aspects when it came to Racing Point, and also a bit really between Ocon and Alonso, because while they've been happy and smiling for the cameras on the racetrack, they've been very happy to get the old elbows out and show each other that, yes, you may be in the same car as me, but I'm not going to give you preferential treatment, really. So he's not going to this green in terms of having to manage two drivers. But I think that's really important for Alpine, because they've got so much funding behind them. They seem to be on a good upward trajectory when you look at the fact that they've been able to pull away Omar Safnar and BWT from Aston Martin, who are now. So things are looking up. So they need two drivers to be pulling in the same direction and being more team players than individuals. I'm confident really that both drivers can do that. Gasley, for one, has always been happy to be a team leader and to play the team role as well. Like, he's led Alfa Tauri, for example, and helped nurture and sort of bring through Yuki Tsunoda without being too abrasive and aggressive and domineering in many aspects. And also he's played the support role to Verstappen, albeit not too successfully, but he's played that role. So yeah, congratulations to him. Looking forward to seeing what he can do. 26 years old as well. He's quite young. You've got arguably 10 more years left of Gasley, be that at Alpine or elsewhere, really. So be interesting to see what they can do. But if they can consolidate fourth in this championship, then you're looking forward to the next going, well, they could go one better if things don't work out for other teams.
Beforehand, before these announcements, when we were mocking Alpine for all the shenanigans that occurred, if you remember, this was all catalysed by a certain Fernando Alonso deciding to leave the sport. Reflecting on it now, would you say that with Alonso leaving and then picking up Pierre Gasley, this puts Alpine in a better position long term, or do you think it was better for them to keep Fernando Alonso? What do you think?
I think Gasley, getting him in over Alonso is definitely the better choice in the long term, because 26 versus the very end of your career, I think, is so more important longevity as well. And it's not like you're giving up, I suppose, talent, are you, for youth? It's not like you're recruiting a serious rookie like someone like Oscar Piastri, for that matter, going from one end of the spectrum in terms of age, experience and talent to, I suppose, a raw, green young talent. So I think Gasley is a good successor to Alonso. Of course, he's not going to be as good as him, I think, in many aspects. I think they will lose the Alonso factor that's perhaps pulled them up to P4 in some aspects in terms of the points he's been able to accumulate. But if I was Alpine looking before and after, I'd say they've landed on their feet fairly well here.
It's an interesting one because I still think that losing Fernando Alonso is a stinker. I know he's 41, but he's still very, very good. He's arguably the best 41-year-old that Formula One's ever seen, quite possibly, in terms of the levels he's produced. And losing Oscar Piastri is also a stinker because they've invested so much time into him. They couldn't get their contracts right, and then they had to pay all those silly legal fees, which they could have avoided had they actually kept a promise, and then not tried to arguably degrade his point of view of the whole contract situation. But at the end of the day, picking up Gasley as the replacement is actually not too bad. They've actually rescued it pretty well. Had they ended up with for example, with no disrespect to the man, Antonio Giovinazzi, or no disrespect to this man, Nico Hülkenberg, you would have gone, ugh, they've kind of lost out there. But Gasley is actually a very talented driver. So they've picked it up pretty well. And also, arguably, if you look at it from one point of view, I know they're not rivals, so to speak, but Alpine have, by signing that driver, weakened Alfa Tauri, who, they're not a rival this year, but they've weakened another team by taking their driver. And they've also weakened the Red Bull stable by taking a Red Bull back driver. So, it's a good move overall. They could have, in my opinion, I still think Alonso Piastri was clearly their number one choice. And I think having the indecision that came from that saga earlier in the summer has not put them in a good light at all. But I think in terms of a pick-me-up from the floor that they needed, Gasley is a very good pick-me-up, so to speak.
I think I mostly agree with Tom, because you are right that Fernando Alonso is an exceptional talent, and certainly this year he has caused lots and lots of trouble on track, especially with his, let's say, uncanny ability to keep people behind him for extended periods of time. And that comes down to Fernando Alonso's amazing car positioning, fantastic spatial awareness, and also his uncanny ability just to be able to wring the last ounces of performance out of the car without pushing it over the edge. And that's something I think certainly is why he's a double world champion. But the problem is in terms of the long-term future for Alonso, he's only going to go really one way, which is unfortunately out of Formula One. He's getting on a bit now, and him going over to Aston Martin, I don't know. I can see it being a bit of a disaster for him. So, what they say? They always say is one door closes, another one opens up, and I think Alpine have looked at the class of talent and picked up Pierre Gasley, who I would say is at this moment exactly equal in terms of talent to Esteban Ocon. And actually, the stats seem to back me up with this one, because they are very, very, very close in terms of their overall performance. And I think if they get to Esteban Ocon's level of talent in the team, I think that puts them above other teams like McLaren. And whereas someone like Fernando Alonso, I think, is going to get worse over time, I can see Pierre Gasley and Ocon both going from strength to strength, and perhaps their natural rivalry, because they want to prove who's perhaps the best French driver on the grid. Perhaps that level of rivalry will propel them to new levels. We saw the immense pressure that Lewis Hamilton put on Max make Max into a better driver, and probably the other way around as well. And if you look at great rivalries recently with Hamilton and Rosberg, I'd say that that the fierce competition there forced them both to do better than they ever thought they could before. I mean, after the season in which Nico Rosberg won the Formula One World Championship, as he likes to remind us every time he's on TV, he actually said that one of the reasons why he retired was because he just couldn't keep up anymore. The fitness, the mental sort of state he had to be in, it forced him to get to a new level that he never thought he would have to get to before. And so, if that level of rivalry forces both Pierre Gasley and Esteban Ocon to get to a new level, then I think actually they'll be doing better than if they had stuck around with Fernando Alonso.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, how many years do you think we've got left of peak Alonso? Are we going to see peak Alonso next year in terms of Aston Martin, then he's going to fall off a cliff? Because we've seen only too recently in terms of Kimi Raikkonen, drivers are great until they're not, and then they fall off a cliff, and then everyone goes, oh, why are they still here? So are we going to see something similar with Alonso come 2024 or 5?
I don't think he'll be here that long. I can honestly see it's a strange one, because obviously we discussed before his move to Aston Martin and how it's a multi-year contract, but then has he got multi-years left in the sport, basically?
I'm asking you.
But yeah, that's the thing. And I fired it right back at you, but I will answer it. But hopefully, because I love seeing Alonso in the sport, but I don't know for how much longer. But he just hasn't dropped yet. His levels are still the same, even though he had 2 years out before he returned last year. So perhaps, but I can't see him staying for longer than, say, past his multi-year contract, so 24.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. 2024, I don't know. I mean, clearly, the length of time Alonso is going to stay in the sport is entirely going to be down to how long he can either stand being in Aston Martin because of the people, or how long he can stand to be in Aston Martin due to performance. And if he gets vettled by them, then I think that he probably won't last, as you're saying, just more than the end of his contract. But in terms of his physical peak, I reckon he's got 3 or 4 more years. I think by the 4th year, he will be not where he is now. I don't think you can keep it up for that much longer. So I see him getting 2-year contracts out of Aston Martin, and then hopefully projecting them up into a better place, and then he'll probably exit out the sport come 2026. Maybe he'll stay for the 2026 season in order to help them with the first year of the new engine regulations. But after that, I can also see Aston Martin, if they're still if they're in the sport still, deciding that they need to get more talent into the car as well. Because the other issue they've got is we don't know how long Lance Stroll wants to stay in Formula One as well. Because although he is better than he used to be, and he is better than he used to be, and he did great in the wet, and that was really good. Big shout out to Lance Stroll actually for his good performance this weekend. For Lance, this can't be that meaningful for him. He has the opportunity to drive or do whatever he wants in life, because he is one of those people, and I can't see him thinking, yep, I want to be in 15th place for the rest of my life. I could see him either becoming managerial within the team and getting into Formula One and having fun in Formula One in another capacity, or doing something like Extreme E or Formula E or something else where he can have some fun instead. So I think perhaps Aston Martin won't keep Fernando Alonso around for that much longer. Maybe say end of 2026 probably.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, and apologies for that slight tangent. We now go on to the replacement of Pierre Gasley. We go on to the Dutchman Nick de Vries. He'll be racing for Alfa Tauri next year alongside Yuki Tsunoda. For obvious reasons, the 27-year-old has been released by the Mercedes Academy, but it's unknown how long his contract with the Alfa Tauri constructor is or will be. Now, it's worth noting that Mercedes boss Toto Wolff says he, quote, isn't worried about Nick de Vries taking any knowledge of Mercedes over to the sister team of the sworn enemy Red Bull. But then again, and he's hardly likely to say it's giving him sleepless nights to say. But what do we make of this move then in terms of Nick de Vries? He did so well with Williams getting that P9 finish, should I say. But what are our thoughts on him now being one of the two drivers for Alfa Tauri?
So remember when I said, Nick de Vries would never go to Alfa Tauri, because why would Mercedes let one of their best prospects go to Red Bull team? That would make no sense. Anyway. So, overall, another good move. I think in terms of a replacement for Gasley, they had to be bold, Alfa Tauri. Franz Tost quoted as saying that he wants an exciting option, exciting signing. Hence why they chased after Colton Herta for a long period of time. Hence why they wanted him to possibly replace Pierre Gasley. And when that didn't materialise because of super licence issues, the next best option was Nick de Vries. And I have to say, I think it's a great move. I think you get a talented driver who gets away into Formula 1 after having possibly several avenues being cut off. And it also makes you think, if Nick de Vries can do what he did in a Williams on his debut at Monza, what could he do in an Alfa Tauri, a faster car? And one that's more likely to be up in the higher echelons of the points. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that works out. I think it makes sense because, in terms of getting De Vries for Red Bull, because one, again, they've weakened a rival, they've weakened Mercedes by taking someone out of their driver academy, even though he will still have links to Mercedes. At the same time, he's not driving for a Mercedes team. It's kind of like the opposite situation to Alex Albon, who is still technically affiliated with the Red Bull, yet he's driving for Williams Mercedes. But anyway, at the same time, it makes sense too because Red Bull's driver academy is filled with talent, but not talent that could realistically make the step up next year. You got lots of drivers in Formula 2 who are Red Bull backed. You've got ones like Dennis Hauger, you've got Liam Lawson, you've got Ayumu Iwasa, you've got Jehan Deruvala. You've got 4 Red Bull backed drivers there, but none of them are higher than 5th in the championship, and the ones who are in their first year of F2 are no higher than 9th in the championship. So not ready for Formula 1. Yuki Tsunoda came 3rd in his first season of F2, and they considered him ready for Formula 1. So therefore, it shows that they're not going to take a punt on one of those drivers. They've got a couple of drivers in F3 as well, who again had their first year in the category and came within the top 3 or 4 drivers. But again, unless you're Max Verstappen, you're not going to be promoted from F3 straight up to Formula 1. So realistically, with junior options low, with Pierre Gasley on the way to another team, they had to look outside the academy. They had to do what they did when they signed Sergio Perez to the main team in 2021. They had to look outside the academy. And in terms of the options they had, this was the best one. They were going for someone who's been itching to get into Formula 1. Realistically, someone like, Nico Hülkenberg or Antonio Giovinazzi, who's been in F1 before, wouldn't really accept an Alfa Tauri drive necessarily, but someone like Nick de Vries would take both hands the chance to have a Formula 1 drive with Alfa Tauri, even if they are not Mercedes or Mercedes affiliated. So it makes sense for all parties. It's a bit like the Gasley move. It makes sense for all parties. I mean, De Vries gets his big chance. He arguably gets the chance to be a team leader pretty quickly, because unless Tsunoda steps up his game, then you could argue Nick de Vries, if he hits the ground running, is taking control of that team pretty quickly, I'd say. Obviously, early days, and we don't know how it will pan out, but it'd be fascinating to see if that would be the situation. And also, Alfa Tauri get a very talented driver who still brings a bit of backing, not as much, but he still brings a bit of backing. They also get someone who, and I emphasise this point, Nick de Vries will be 28 by the time he makes his Formula 1 debut next year, which is old, but the thing at the end of the day is that he is already a GP2 champion, or Formula 2 champion, sorry, and he's a Formula E champion. He is technically, even though it's Formula E, he's technically a world champion. So it's not too often you can take a world champion from another sport, or another form of motorsport, sorry, and bring them into a Formula 1 seat. So, not a bad situation to be in for Alfa Tauri. They've got someone with a lot of speed who, if they hit the ground running, could really, really make strides next year. So I think a good move for both parties, really, and I'm fascinated to see how he does, realistically. I think it's possibly one of the really interesting subplots of F1 next year in like the midfield / back of the grid area.
That's an excellent summary. And I happen to agree with you, actually. And pretty much everything you said, because Nick de Vries,
thank you,
really showed himself to be a top-class talent. And I have to hold my hands up. I was incorrect on who he would end up going to, which is a bit of a shame, I think. Yeah, and I mean, I still think that he could have wormed his way into Williams. Do you think?
Yeah.
And that would have given him maybe a better leg into the top tier teams. I don't know if I'm just being cynical, but Alfa Tauri is kind of like, a short hit of goodness, whereas I think Williams would be the slow burn that he would then use to propel himself up to Mercedes.
And I mean, as previously said, Alfa Tauri are now 9th in the constructors, Williams are 10th, so you could even argue there's not too much difference between the two, aside from one's Mercedes and one is Red Bull, and one's a bit more bitey and snappy and less patient when it comes to performance. So that gives you a point there. Carry on.
Exactly, and we know as well that Sergio Perez is going to be in Red Bull for ages. I could just see it, and Max is 9 years or something stupid. And as it turns out, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez is a pretty formidable team. And so, as much as on the positives, and this is everything Angus has said is definitely true. It's fantastic he's got a drive. My only concern is he's going to get sort of Gasleyed or Albon, and but apart from, instead of getting up to Red Bull and then going back down, I'm worried that he's just going to be a bit stuck, a bit like Gasley, a bit stuck, and then you end up in Williams. Look at Albon. Anyway, so I'm just thinking, just from a long-term plan, it's brilliant. Nick de Vries really showed himself to be a fantastic talent, and there's a whole episode where we spout how brilliant he is. But my just concern is he's going to get into it, and he's going to be there with Yuki Tsunoda, and Yuki Tsunoda, to be honest, I think he is going to peak at Alfa Tauri and will not go much further. And I'm worried that Nick de Vries, paired with that sort of Yuki Tsunoda partner, won't be able to show off what he can do properly, especially as Tsunoda hasn't been bringing back the points particularly well this season, and the overall performance of Alfa Tauri, even if Nick did really well, might not reflect his talent. And so, as you say, Tom, if Williams was also on the table, I think, and is only one place below, I think Nick could have done really well there. But at least he's got a seat, which is way better, way more than many other drivers will ever get. So I'm hoping he goes into Alfa Tauri, absolutely storms it, collects many, many points for them, and is able to have a pretty long and fruitful career. I'm just concerned that it's a bit of a honey trap.
I have to agree there. And when I saw this news flash up, they'd be going to Alfa Tauri, I had the thought, are Alfa Tauri now really serious about being the sister team and not a junior team to Red Bull? Because ever since they rebranded themselves from Toro Rosso to Alfa Tauri, they kept on saying, we're a sister team. We're not a junior team. We are a sister team to Red Bull. We are not a feeder team. And that was fine until, I suppose, all the drivers from Alfa Tauri then started continuing to go to Red Bull, and there was no real change aside from, I suppose, the optics and semantics of the fact that the colour scheme was different, staffing was different, engines were different in some capacities. But we didn't really take that claim too seriously. But now, is this the sort of watershed moment where we see Alfa Tauri go, well, actually, you're secured in your driver lineup with Verstappen and with Perez. What's the point in us promoting young drivers who aren't ready, only for them to get stuck in the pipeline? We might as well go and plough our own furrow and, put ourselves first and select a driver who can nurture the young Yuki Tsunoda, who still is talented yet raw, when Gasley is leaving, because I think it was quite clear that Gasley's stubbornness, I suppose, and his desire to get out of that trap was soon going to be, fruitful in many regards because of the sort of blockage, I guess, of Perez and Verstappen doing so well at the very top teams, and the fact that in many aspects Gasley had his chance at Red Bull, but things just hadn't really worked out. But then to flip that on its head and to play devil's advocate against myself, was someone like Nick de Vries realistically the best option that they had moving forwards? Because if they didn't go for Nick de Vries, they could have gone for Daniel Ricciardo. Doubt that would have happened. Ricciardo's spoken about his desire to have a reset and a year out of the sport, and also once again you're going back to a driver you'd formerly had. You've got someone like Mick Schumacher who's still in contract talks with Haas, so that's a sticky subject there. I'm not going to go for Albon because obviously he's with Williams now and doing rather well, and as Angus has mentioned and described so eloquently, there is little talent coming through as Yuki Tsunoda was previously, so there were few options really, and they thought, well, maybe Nick de Vries, who's shown talent but only really in one race, maybe he's the solution, because yes, he did really well in that Williams race and did really well to get P9, but then again there's been so many other drivers who have done so well in their first race. Guan Yu Zhou, for example, got points in his first race. Everyone thought, oh, here we go. Guan Yu Zhou has arrived. What a driver he's going to be. And then things haven't really continued as they are. So there was still a bit of a gamble about this move. There's still a lack of race experience. There's a lot of garage experience, granted. But we'll see how this one goes. But congratulations to Nick de Vries. I wouldn't be too concerned if I'm Mercedes, though, in terms of giving knowledge over to Red Bull, because I'm not too sure what knowledge Red Bull can give Mercedes, aside from the fact that maybe saying, well, don't do it this way, because this way is the wrong way, really. And with the Drivers' Championship all done and dusted, the Constructors is the only championship remaining where it's yet to be clear who's going to be winning that, but officially, or unofficially, it seems like Red Bull have got that one all sewn up. But looking further down the Constructors, there seems to be a nice few battles brewing towards the top as well. We now look to, for example, McLaren versus Alpine for P4, the gap being 14 points. At this current point in time, you've currently got Alpine sitting in 4th, and then you've got McLaren sitting in 5th. So what are our thoughts on this battle? Will Alpine hold their ground, get that P4 place, take it back from McLaren, or will they lose it last moment and be ruining the chances they maybe missed in the races to come, but also races gone past as well?
That's very cynical, isn't it? Are they going to lose it? No, I don't think so. I think they're pretty secure. Why do you think they wouldn't keep their position?
Well, because you look at the momentum, for example, coming from McLaren, you've got P7, P4, P10 from one of their drivers. So the momentum there seems to be going, and when you consider as well, you've got Alpine with Renault once again having a few more reliability issues. All I'm saying is, with the gap being only 14 points, it's not an insurmountable task for McLaren to go and leapfrog them and for things to go horribly wrong for Alpine, particularly when you've got one of their drivers no longer contracted to them and perhaps being willing to be a bit more loose with his driver style and put himself first versus the team. But
I know what you're saying, but the thing is, you kind of highlighted it, I think, on the fly, which is one of their drivers. I think
true.
The problem with McLaren this year is they are driving with one arm tied behind their back, and that little Daniel Ricciardo shaped arm is not really necessarily pulling his weight. And look, we're getting towards the end of the season now, when we're getting to the really fast, high speed tracks, and Daniel hasn't exceeded at them this year. His performance has been consistently sporadic, and he's had lucky moments. I think, looking at the last race, for example, he was pretty lucky to end up, where he did. But if you look at actually how he's done across the whole season, he's still in 12th place, and that's the problem, I think, for him. He's been unable to be able to bring home the points consistently, and so when we hit that one race that he does okay at, we're like, oh, brilliant, Daniel's doing well again, and then he's not. But if it was two Lando Norrises, for example, I think they would be doing much better. But I think, Tom, the problem McLaren is, and I like McLaren a lot, they are my favourite team, is with 2 Daniel Ricciardos, I think they would be in 9th place. And I think with 2 Lando Norrises, they would certainly be into 4th, way ahead of Alpine. And that's the problem they've got. Instead, they've averaged the 2 and are currently in 5th place. And yeah, Alfa Romeo is behind them by 80 points. But that I don't think that detracts from the fact that McLaren is kind of now in limbo, in no man's land. Whereas Alpine, I think they've got the wind in their sails. And yes, they've got reliability issues with Renault, but their reliability issues are kind of for the right reasons, if you'd like. Their engine blows up on them when they're doing really, really well. And that kind of unreliability is forgivable to me because at least they're pushing. Daniel is being unreliable in a different sense. He's just trundling. And he's admitted that he's not going to be on the sport next year, and he came out and said that he hoped to be in Formula One in 2024. But to be honest, I can't see it unless he wants to go to Williams, and I'd love him to go to Williams because I really like Daniel Ricciardo. But I think that's the reason why Alpine's going to do really well. I think Alpine's got the right type of unreliability, and they've got 2 drivers within the team in Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon that are really, really good. And it's going to be unfortunate that Alpine's going to get these unreliability issues. But so did Red Bull, and Red Bull doing really well. You kind of hope that they push through that to get to the other side. Whereas McLaren are having to look fundamentally at the team, the structure and its driver lineup, to reassess how it picks up the pieces after this season. And I really do hope they do. But at the moment, I can't see McLaren beating Alpine next year, and I can't see them at the moment beating them this year.
Alpine will come 4th for several reasons, some of which have been alluded to already. Number 1, McLaren's driving with 1 driver, effectively. Lando Norris has 78% of their points this year, which is ludicrous to think. And when that 22% is from Daniel Ricciardo, it really puts it into perspective. Daniel Ricciardo this year has the same amount of points finishes as Williams. That's how much he's been underperforming. And you think about that Williams car and how much those drivers have had to push it on its day to get points. Says a lot, really. Alpine also has fundamentally a faster car. I know they had that blip in Singapore, which wasn't helped by their unreliability, but they have a faster car. Suzuka showed it. They got a better car in a straight line. Notice how Esteban Ocon was able to... I know Mercedes in a straight line is like weak, but look how Esteban Ocon was able to hold off Hamilton for about pretty much the whole race, the whole 40 minutes or whatever they were racing for in Suzuka. And we're coming up to circuits where... you can say this about most circuits these days, but circuits where straight line speed is important. Big long straights in USA and Mexico, Sao Paulo, lots of straight line speed is always key. The only thing that can maybe hold them back is the air. It's a very, very nuanced point, this, but the air in Mexico and Sao Paulo is the race is at higher altitude, and that usually increases the chances of unreliability. But I think at the end of the day, Alpine struck a decisive blow last time with that, 18 points they got from Suzuka compared to McLaren's solitary point, allowing them to regain the momentum that they lost after Singapore, having ceded the chance to go in front or stay in front in the battle for 4th. So I can only see Alpine consolidating their lead going into the final few races, because a stronger car, better characteristics for the circuits coming up, and they have 2 drivers, not 1. Sorry, Daniel.
Yes, but let's remind ourselves of 2020, where it went down to the final race, this being for 3rd place, and it was McLaren who beat both Racing Point and Renault. So I don't want to, push an agenda or anything, but just saying it has happened before. It could happen again. Now we go down to the battle for P9 between Haas and the aforementioned Alfa Tauri. Imagine saying that after a few pints. They are equal on points when it comes to those 2 constructors. Who is going to get 8th place? Who do you feel could get 9th out of those 2?
Oh, good questions. I don't know. I really don't know. It's so bizarre, but I feel like Haas has had a real roller coaster of a season. Wouldn't you agree? If you were to plot Haas's like success on the y-axis and then time on the x-axis, like at the beginning of the season, it shot up to 1 million, and like as the season's gone down, it too has also gone down. So as time has progressed, we've sort of shot down again, and it must be really weird for like Gunther Steiner, the team principal, and also Gene Haas, because they kind of came out of the gates having more success than they probably should have, and we got the memes of the Steiner ship getting bigger and bigger and bigger each time they did well. And so if you're Gene Haas, you're thinking, oh my goodness, we've designed this incredible car, we've got this incredible Ferrari power unit behind it as well, which is amazing, and we're in 4th. We might finish this season in sort of 5th, 6th, maybe 7th place. And then the rest of the season's happened, and it feels like where Ferrari's strategy team has been pretty poor and inconsistent, they stick what they believe is their poor strategy team into Haas, because Haas's strategy calls this year have been even more bizarre than Ferrari's. Like, I reckon they must have a strategy development program within Haas, because I don't know who does the strategy, because it at times it almost feels like they are trying to be bad. In the last race, for example, in Japan, they stuck Mick Schumacher out on the wet tyres for far too long when everyone else was in intermediate tyres, just so that he could, for a moment he was leading the race because everyone else pitted, and they went, no, we'll keep you out, Mick, because there might be a safety car, and of course there wasn't, and so he then pitted and came out stone dead last. And there's been things like this the whole season when they've just been putting weird tyres on the car. They've been pitting at odd times. They've almost been like undercutting themselves with Kevin Magnussen and Schumacher having like weirdly competing strategies as well. And so as the season's gone on, they've kind of got worse and worse and worse, until I think what Haas is currently coasting on is that initial portion of success. And it hasn't helped that, Mick's got basically half the points of Kevin Magnussen. So if Schumacher was able to keep up with Kevin, I guess they would be doing a little bit better, i.e. they'd be challenging Aston Martin. But I think if Haas don't beat Aston Martin at the end of this, they should feel completely devastated, because they came out of the gates completely flying. We were all saying that Haas was going to do brilliantly. Now, Alfa Tauri, on the other hand, I feel like the wind's got in their sails a little bit, and Pierre Gasley, let's face it, is doing really well this year. Whereas Yuki Tsunoda seems to be, do you want to say, struggling a bit, because Yuki Tsunoda's got 11 points, which isn't brilliant, to be honest. And Pierre Gasley, again, 23 points, a double. So it seems to me like they both got in this situation where they've got one driver who's not really holding their own in Yuki Tsunoda, Alfa Tauri, and Mick Schumacher in Haas. Then you have the other driver, Kevin Magnussen at Haas, and Pierre Gasley at Alfa Tauri, keeping them in the running for those better positions. So I think, however, on balance, it will be Alfa Tauri that beats Haas, simply because I can't see Haas keeping up the momentum for the rest of the season. I feel like Haas need to enter into like a micro season where we only have 4 races.
Yeah, it's I think it's generous of you to call it a battle for P8 or whatever, because nobody seems to want it at the moment. Having looked, and they've been so static that Aston Martin have gone from, so in the last 7 races, Haas and Alfa Tauri have scored 7 points between them in that time, which is not too many. And in that same time period, Aston Martin have gone from being on 18 points and nowhere to being on 45 points and challenging for 6th. So Aston Martin have gone by shot by at fast pace, whilst Haas and Alfa Tauri have just sort of not done much with their lives in that time. And it's a weird one because both teams could be considered to have more experienced drivers who are reliable, solid performers. I'd argue you could argue Gasley goes further than that. And then drivers who were rookies last year, have potential but don't show it as often as they maybe should, in Mick Schumacher and Yuki Tsunoda. One of which, in Schumacher, possibly will be out of the sport next year. So there are also two teams who have not really progressed from the start of the season. They both started off all right. They got some points finishes in there. They both have, via Magnussen and Gasley, a top 5 finish from earlier on in the season. So they both have that potential to reach that on a very, very good day. It's just that very, very good day, as shown by the one top 5 result, only happened once. At the same time, trying to predict a winner, I think I do have a clear idea of who will get it. I think Alfa Tauri will get it simply because their recent form is more promising. And the fact that Gasley has been in the points he's been in the points 3 times in the last 5 races, whilst Kevin Magnussen, as the lead driver of Haas, has not really been anywhere in that same period. And you see the Haas car still struggling to get out of Q1 sometimes, let alone into Q3, whilst the Alfa Tauri is, on a couple of occasions more, has made it into Q3. And at the end of the day, if you qualify higher, you give yourself a better chance of scoring points on race day. So, based on that, I'd give the slight advantage to Alfa Tauri. At the same time, I do joke about it being about both teams not really seeming bothered about who gets it. But at the end of the day, even 8th and 9th place, there's so much prize money in Formula 1 that even the difference between 8th and 9th place is still I'm not quoting an exact figure here, but it could be in the region of $5 to $10 million extra prize money, which for a team like Haas especially is gold dust. So it's an important battle down at that end of the grid, regardless of what's going on at the front, what draws our attention more. But if you had to put me on the spot and I'd had to pick a winner of that one, I'd say Alfa Tauri will probably just scrape it.
Yeah, and this is huge for us, isn't it, really? When you consider how poorly they did last season, nowhere near the points. You've obviously had the fiasco when it comes to Mazepin and the sponsor there leaving, which was, of course, owned by his dad. So a lot of money gone from Haas. And them getting P8 versus P9 could be the difference, really, to, A, what sort of car they feel next season, but also how long they're in the sport, because we've had comments recently from Gene Haas, actually, saying about Mick Schumacher. He's a very talented driver, a driver full of promise, but he's a driver that causes us really a lot of damage in terms of the cars and then also the bank account as well, because they've had to go and rebuild so many cars because he keeps on crashing. So it's a bit of a sticky situation for Haas, but I don't know, with the Texan Grand Prix next, I feel that they could surprise everyone and get themselves some points. Not talking too much, but maybe a P9, a P10, a P8 round there. And that could really be the difference, because both teams have seemingly been allergic to getting points over the last few races, aside from one or two exceptions there. I do, however, agree there are pros in both teams. You have Magnussen, for example, who can seemingly pull points out of anywhere. Look at the start of the season, for example, on that one. And then Gasley, who we've spoken about as well, a very talented driver. He's doing so well in the Drivers' Championship, when ultimately the car that's been developed for him is quite below par, really. So either of them could get it, but I feel that Haas will hold on to this one, really. And I feel that we're due another good performance by Mick Schumacher, because he's shown it when it comes to Austria and the British Grand Prix, how good he can be. And there's been so many close calls in terms of him being near the points and for whatever reason not getting that, to, let's say, his own faults or someone else's. So I would back Haas to nick this one, but I can't see them climbing any higher than 8th. And if they do get 8th, it would be by a handful of points that I can count on one hand. For now, as mentioned at the start, hopefully, of this podcast, where the next Grand Prix is the Texan Grand Prix. We are going over to Austin. We look there for a circuit where Verstappen and Hamilton have both done so well in races gone by. The last person who got pole position there was Max Verstappen. Fastest lap was Lewis Hamilton, but then Verstappen won it on the Sunday. So this is a track where both constructors have done well, and could this be a chance for Mercedes to finally get their first race win of the season? Not something I thought I'd be saying at the start of the season.
No.
No.
They don't have the... Well, do they have the speed? No, they don't. They don't have the speed. Do you remember last year? Right, I feel like we're into... Yeah, do you remember last year? Last year felt so long ago. But we had the battle between... like Mercedes, who had the top line speed, and that incredible engine, fast car, and versus Red Bull, who didn't have the speed, but they had the aerodynamics. And Max won through luck, effectively. Luck and excellent strategy. But if you remember, Hamilton was chasing him down at the end, because the top line speed is key at circuits of the Americas. And unfortunately, Mercedes is not fast down the straights. It doesn't have that straight line speed. And I think they're going to come into problems because of the same thing. I think they will be quick in terms of, like, you know, out of the top 3 teams, I think they'll be third, which is where they kind of are. That's a, you know, really boring prediction, but it's true. Whereas Ferrari has the straight line speed, and Red Bull is sort of, you know, in the hybrid of them of the two. So I think we're going to have a weird situation again where Red Bull is able to strategize to Max into a victory, but instead of Mercedes chasing them down and trying to use their straight line speed to the advantage, I think it's going to be Ferrari that does. So if you pinned me down and said you got to predict the winner, then I would say it's going to be Max Verstappen 1, Charles Leclerc 2, Sergio Perez 3, and then I reckon Lewis Hamilton 4, followed by George Russell, and I think Sainz is going to break down because it's unfortunate. But no, I don't think they're going to get a victory here. I don't think Mercedes is going to get a victory here because I just don't think they've got what it takes in terms of the raw performance. And this is a particularly fun track. It's one of my favourite tracks, actually. There's loads of great things about it. In the first sector, you go through these like S's, and that reminds me a bit of Silverstone. And then you have the great run up the hill at the start of the race and across the start finish line as well. That bit's brilliant. It's a great track, but unfortunately, none of this stuff really favours Mercedes.
I'm going to stick my neck out there and make a nice ambitious prediction because I read an article a few months back. From a month or so back, George Russell saying that they thought Austin was the best chance for victory in the last few races of the season. Mercedes have an upgrade this weekend. Toto Wolff has played down expectations, sandbagging immediately. I like it, Toto. It's what they used to do back in the glory days when they dominated the sport. They would always say, pre-season testing, they'd be like, we're like 2 seconds off Ferrari. We're not going to win the championship this year. First race, 1-2, win by half a minute. So he's definitely playing down expectations because he knows something that he doesn't want to tell us. I'm just going to go for George Russell to win his first Grand Prix on Sunday. He's going to win the Austin Grand Prix. Max Verstappen and Red Bull will want to wrap up the Constructors' Championship, but they won't have their eyes fully on the prize because Verstappen's won the championship already. I predict he'll come off the top of his game a little bit in the last few races. I think Ferrari will find a way to unstrategize themselves from a win somehow. And therefore I think George Russell's going to come through and he's going to beat off the natural affinity that Lewis Hamilton has with the United States, and Russell's going to win his first Grand Prix this weekend. You heard it here first.
Well, it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 34 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this episode, be that on your preferred podcast provider or via River Radio, be that live or via the listen back feature. A reminder that you can follow myself, Tristan, and the F1 in Review account on Twitter. Our handle for F1 in Review is just like that, no hyphens or nothing, just F1 in Review, capital F. Look for us. Do give us a follow if you can. And as we mentioned there, we look forward now to the Texan Grand Prix. If you're watching or listening to this in the UK, qualifying will be 11 PM. That's 11 PM UK time on the Saturday. And then on the Sunday, UK time again, that'll be 8 till 9:45 PM. So gone from the really early start to a really late start. So be prepared for that this weekend. But as I say, that's all we've got time for in terms of this episode. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back next week to review what happens at this Grand Prix.